This is a photo I took last week when I was traveling. I came by this cafe, and what I saw struck me in a weird way. You see, there's two bits here, doing good, brewing better. And the sign at the door says, our coffee restores farm worker homes in Nicaragua. And I thought, what an interesting, strong display of values and purpose of a company that does coffee, right? And it got me thinking that they are actually just reacting to what people want. That consumerism is changing. People are expecting a lot more, and this is what Ken spoke about. This is what Rachel spoke about as well. People are expecting a lot more from companies than just getting a product, being sold to. They want to feel good about the choices that they're making. I wanted to go in and get a coffee because I knew I would do a good thing and trust that they would also have good coffee. Cynically, as we all are, I think, these days, I wondered if this was just a front, if they're really walking the talk. So I checked out the website, and there was indeed a lot of content that was talking about the people behind the coffee, that was talking about the community activities that they're running and the homes that they're rebuilding. So they actually do a lot of things that are very good. They put it front and center. And that's what I felt was a good start to talk more about 21st century brands. Mike was nice enough to already give a brief introduction. I was with Unilever for more than 15 years. I worked at global brands, big brands like Dove and Axe. I worked at smaller brands there as well. I started getting paid to eat ice cream every day, which was fantastic. I had the fortune not only to work on great brands, but also work together with great people and great agencies who taught me a lot about brand development and brand building. I felt that after 15 years, I needed to widen my horizon a little bit, and I went to Hyper Island to get a master's degree in digital media management, and that was kind of a change, kind of rewiring your brain. Adopting a digital mindset, learning how to be an agent of change, applying design thinking, creative problem solving and such. And that led me to joining Airbnb as well. I was a host on the platform already. I'd met some people who worked there, and I knew and used that product already. But I spoke to the right people there, and they were looking for somebody to start a marketing team for Asia Pacific, and I was lucky enough to be right there at the right time in the right space. After I left Airbnb, I took some time off and I joined a co-working operator who was also looking into co-living. So again, touching on important parts of people's lives and making a change and disrupting what is out there at the working capital. And I've been running my own consultancy now for 2 years. It's a small club. It is skewed towards startups, SMEs, but also MNCs. And I work a lot with my clients on vision, strategy, and execution. And seeing what Ken and what Rachel were talking about is very much in line with what I'm providing as a service as well, building on the experience that I have. Let's talk a bit more about Airbnb. I saw that a lot of you have used it, which is great. Please continue doing so. I have joined them at a time when they relaunched their logo. And they did that not only by putting up a new visual identity, but they seasoned it with storytelling about why they're doing what they're doing, what is their purpose, what is their vision, what do they want to achieve. And I'm happy to share a link afterwards with a video of where Airbnb is talking about that. Airbnb is coined as one of the poster children of the sharing economy or the gig economy, and I think now you can also call them kind of a blueprint to be a 21st century company. How they started was actually quite interesting. This is the original Airbnb. This was the first place that was listed. The founders of Airbnb, Brian Chesky and Joe Gebbia, they were living here in Soma in a really dodgy neighborhood, and they had a problem. They could not afford to pay rent. They were running out of money, and they were kind of scrambling to see what are we going to do next. They knew that there was a design conference coming to town in San Francisco, and they had read that all the hotel rooms were booked out, and they thought, there's no more space in the city, but we have space. We can put a mattress here, and we can put a mattress there, and we move some furniture to the side, and we put up more mattresses. We give people breakfast in the morning. And Bob's your uncle, and they set up a website really quickly, and they were overwhelmed by the interest that they got. So they kind of, out of a problem that they had, serving a community of like-minded designers as they were, they created Airbnb. It's something special that they have created because in the following years, they dug deep into why this idea of sleeping in strangers' homes is so interesting. The hotel experience is broken is what they saw. It's about cookie cutter experiences. It's about profitability and growth rather than being hosts, right? The hotel experience, which is all about recognizing you by your room number, but not so much about recognizing you, by your name and treating you, as a human in a way. It was also the time where more and more people realized that the travel experience itself is broken. Some of you may have experienced this. If you go to the Great Wall of China, if you go to the Louvre and look at the Mona Lisa, if you go to Pisa, or if you go to the Vatican, you will see that you're being shipped around with just masses of other people, like cattle. It's incredibly high prices that you pay to just have a photo op like everybody else, right? But there's no authenticity anymore. There's a lack of the magic that travel used to have back in the days. Right? Travel was about adventure. It used to be about exploration and discovery, but also achievement, right? And returning home from a trip as, a grown person because of your experiences, because of your achievements. All of that was gone. If you see how these guys experience Hawaii, this might be fun to some people, and I'm not mocking anybody who thinks this is fun, but you're in Hawaii, it's the sunset, but you're standing on a Segway with 20 other people. That is a travel experience that I personally think something's wrong with it. Something doesn't feel right. 11 years later, Airbnb has now clocked more than 500 million bookings for nights, for stays of strangers, either staying with strangers or in strangers' home. And I know there's an expansion now where hotels and boutique hotels are also part of the platform, but still the core of the business is people staying in people's homes. They have also added experiences, which are personal, local tours by insiders that are off the trodden path. They're not your classic tourist experience. There were a lot of things that Airbnb did to become a 21st century company. And I tried to look up some definitions to help us understand better what does 21st century brand mean. There are different sources. I try to simmer it down to only a few aspects. So 21st century brands are characterized as some that are applying a completely new business model. And I think Rachel was explaining very well how Love Bonito has gone from selling secondhand stuff to making fashion, selling it online, shipping it themselves, to then doing pop-ups, and now doing kind of both things. There's a lot of brands that are now doing direct-to-consumer. They are outsourcing their supply chain. They're cutting out the retail middlemen, and they're just applying a completely new model of doing business. It's also said that 21st century brands are making smart and different use of media. It's not so much about blasting out advertising, but it's more about experiences, and it's about real engagement. 21st century brands are showing changes in how they set up their organizations, the kind of flexibility, decentralization. Maybe there's some companies that don't even have offices anymore. That is a new way of doing things, right? Customer experience is at the focus of 21st century brands. They want to see and understand the customer journey and the experience in every single step, and how they can be part of it. How can they make the customer journey a more delightful, a more engaging, a more positive experience, right? And the last thing is building relationships. And I think Ken was talking about that a lot in his new normal, which I love the fact that you call it out like that. I don't think it's normal yet. I think we're on the way. I think on paper, a lot of people understand it, but it's not the new normal yet. I think there's still a long ways to go. Building relationships means really caring about somebody, being on eye level, trying to really engage and understand your customer, hoping to find a way that this becomes a mutual interest in each other, right? And you get that by not just trying to push a product, but actually adding value and delivering service. So I want to talk about relationships, and I want to talk about the brand side of it. I think that there are 6 elements, and the first one that I want to talk about is purpose. I think what Rachel said, and also what Ken was talking about, having a purpose is something that you ideally start with. It's something that sparks your entrepreneurial instinct. I think it's something that should not come as an afterthought, just to say, we're selling stuff and we're giving parts of it, proceeds to it, to a cause. I think having a purpose really means drilling back down to what is my story, what is my mission, why am I doing this, what is my motivation, right? What was the term you said? Truth? What is my truth? And being able to find and share the truth with your audience. I think with Airbnb, it was relatively simple when they said this weird idea of having strangers come in a home and sleep on airbeds turned into, hey, we're actually adding value because people don't want these cookie-cutter, sterile hotel experiences anymore. They want real, authentic experiences when they go to new places. So if Airbnb's vision is to make all 7 billion people feel where they can belong anywhere, what does it mean with regards to the purpose? I can tell you that when I used to go travel, it was very oftentimes, it was quite lonely, especially when you're a business traveler and you're sitting in a hotel room. It's the loneliest time, right? There was a lot of boredom as well when you went traveling. You just did the same as everybody else. Having a host, a local that you can connect with, that welcomes you to the home, that explains to you the neighborhood, that shows you around, that's when you get a sense of belonging, which is, in the center of Maslow's pyramid, the hierarchy of motivations. This part of growing through travel is what Airbnb is bringing back and is trying to build in as the purpose as well. The growth that comes from the achievement, that comes from discovery and exploration. Here's an example of a brand that I think is also doing a pretty good job with regards to having a purpose and starting with it. And I'm just going to read the part because it's quite small. So the brand is called Bombas. They make socks. They say, when we first learned that socks are the most requested clothing item in homeless shelters, we knew we had to do something. We started Bombas to make an impact on our community by donating a pair of socks for every pair we sold, and continue that philosophy of thoughtful giving towards each clothing item we make. No matter what it is, one purchase, one donated. I think Tom's is doing a very similar thing with shoes. These guys do it with socks. But their starting point, their spark, was when we heard that there was, this is the product that in homeless shelters people need the most. We got to do something about it. I find that very inspiring. Here's another brand. It's also a fashion brand. It's called Noah. They're in New York. In their statement, in their mission, they talk about that as a brand, Noah seeks to take a stand against many of the appalling practices in the fashion industry. Our clothes are made in countries, mills, and factories where tradition, expertise, and human dignity take precedence over the bottom line. We donate portions of our profits to causes we believe in. We speak out on issues we find important and try to help give voice to the people and organizations we care about. We do this humbly, but with a firm belief that a responsible brand is a healthy one. That putting our values on the line pushes us to do our best. I think the line, a responsible brand is a healthy brand, is so incredibly powerful that it shows their conviction. And it shows their beliefs in doing the right thing. It's not just pushing product. It's not just making more profits. The second part that I think is a characteristic of a 21st century brand is being community focused. Now, community here actually means two things. One is the community that a company operates in, and one is the community they serve. So at Airbnb, we knew that the hosts make up a huge and important part of our community, and we were clear that we need to serve them and empower them very well. We also needed to remember that whichever neighborhood, whichever city we're operating in, we need to be mindful of what are the intricacies in those neighborhoods. The founders of Airbnb have always said it's more important to have 100 people that really love us rather than 10,000 people that kind of like us. And what that meant is that they also accepted a slower speed of growth, but building meaningful relationships in the beginning. Fostering a community also means that we're able to give, but also take. So one way that Airbnb is giving to the community is with a lot of tips and support, tools, and on everything you can find on the platform. But there's also meetups, there's trainings, there's partnerships that we give. The founders in the beginning, they went out and they talked to the hosts in New York and they said, what's going well, what could be better? And the host, for example, said, we we think the photos are shitty and it makes us look a bit dodgy. And they said, okay, cool. They bought a really nice camera and they started taking photos of the host places, and the bookings went up. Today, I think Airbnb has a network of more than 30,000 photographers all around the world who go out and take photos of every single room if you wanted to. In return, whenever there was an issue in a city where regulators were about to curb the business of Airbnb and not allowing hosts to list their homes anymore, we were able to activate the community of hosts and say, go to your council meetings, speak up, let's get signatures together. This was not the company being active, but it's actually the community being activated. Today there's a big platform that the host can connect as well. It's the community platform where this is not moderated, this is not our company website, but this is actually for the hosts. I think there are about 1 million members on there, and they exchange notes. And it's not always favorable for Airbnb what they're exchanging there. But we believe that it's important that they have ways to exchange their interests as well, the tips, the things that they learn on the way. It really means that they are sharing not only values, but they're also sharing information and knowledge. So here's an example. This is Lululemon, which is another brand that I think is very keen and very strong in building community and fostering that. Here's a statement from an interview that says, we provide our ambassadors with tools to help identify their career and health goals. Once identified, we work in a partnership to help them achieve anything from growing their personal training business to raising funds for their charity. Each ambassador experience will look different as the experience is curated in partnership between the store and the ambassador. Lululemon is not just pushing Lycra for yoga enthusiasts, but they actually take pride in getting people together, getting more people to move and live an active and healthy lifestyle, but also foster their business and help them with extra activities that they have. Right? I find that really, really strong. So the third one that I see is being narrative-based. Ken was building on that quite well, and I think Rachel did a good job on it too, telling a fantastic story of why we're here. What is our story? Where did we come from? Why is that important? Now, storytelling is something that has been around since cave drawings, I guess. People were telling stories to pass on knowledge. Stories were told to educate. Stories were told to put kids to sleep. Stories were told to entertain, right? And if you are a good storyteller, you can make your audience part of the story. You can empathize. If they're able to understand your story, they say it's impossible to not love somebody whose story you've heard. The stories that are happening when hosts and guests on Airbnb connect and when they click is the other bit that delivers a lot of content, but also magic to the Airbnb experience, right? The founding story that the guys were not able to pay their bills makes them already, you can sympathize with that. You would have empathy with it, right? They didn't start to say, okay, we're going to take on the hotel industry and we're going to take their lunch. They said, we have a problem that we need to solve, and it was a very creative way of solving it. All the stories that are happening when hosts and guests meet, and I can tell you so many because I've stayed on Airbnb so many times. I've met people that I'm still in contact with. My daughter is named after my second or my third Airbnb guest that I hosted in my flat here. There's so many stories that are still not really used by Airbnb to put out there what is all the magic that can happen when you stay on Airbnb rather than a hotel. Right? Building a brand based on your story is better than building a brand on your product. This is Seth Rogen. He is an actor. He is from Canada, and he has played potheads in a lot of movies before. Have you seen Seth Rogen? Anybody know him? Yeah. So he loves to smoke weed in real life as well. So when weed was legalized in Canada, he decided to start his own brand, to start his own company called Houseplant. And I think the narrative of him being the one who goes, I like to smoke weed, it's legal now, I think I can do something about it and start my own company. I find that incredibly believable. I would trust that guy with his choice of strains that he created, and how good the product is. I think the narrative behind this brand is really interesting. If you have time, look it up a little bit more. Besides that, it's also beautiful design. It's a bit Wes Anderson-esque. It doesn't look like pothead stuff, really. But I think it's a really neat brand. I think it's a good story that he has to tell about it. Okay, number 5, technology-driven. I think it's important that today we're harvesting data and we're using technology in the right ways and with the right balance, not just rely on it entirely, but use it in a smart way. The 2 founders of Airbnb, Joe and Brian, they were designers. But they were smart enough when they needed to build a website and build it out to bring on Nate, who was one of those kids that taught himself how to code and started his first company in high school in the basement of his parents. He sold that and paid college with that. But they brought him on board as a tech expert, as the nerd, who brought in the culture of measuring things, using data and using technology to actually make the product better, but also make the experiences better, right? Using data and technology to improve a customer experience. What we used to do was storyboard the journey of the customers on Airbnb. And that would define how do we create the the UX and the UI. What are the steps that people take in the app on desktop? But in order to optimize it, we used hardcore data. Everything was A/B tested. Everything from landing pages to ads to emails, everything was tested and everything was optimized based on the data that was analyzed afterwards on the performance. That also led to business decisions. Like, what are the things that we're going into? What are the things that we're pulling out of? What are opportunities that we see? How can we use the data that we can take from the company and turn that into maybe even interesting stories? I'll give you an example in a minute how another company used their internal data and turned that into very smart creative. The data scientists at Airbnb, they were really good at building quite sophisticated dashboards. And then in the true fashion of the sharing economy, they made this available. If you go to airbnb.io, that is the open source platform where you can basically download all of these little programs. And it can be everything from data visualization to hash-like interface to persistent concurrent off-heap storage, whatever that means. But I guess if you go to GitHub, you know what these things are. So here's an example of Spotify, which I think is a very strong 21st century brand. They saw the data of people and they found interesting stories there. So they said, dear person who played Sorry 42 times on Valentine's Day, what did you do? To the person in Nolita who started listening to holiday music way back in June, you really jingle all the way, huh? I think it's very clever usage of data and turning that into smart creative. I think that's a good sign of a 21st century company that understands the people, makes them chuckle, but really looks into such detail. Lastly, 21st century brands, in my mind, they need to be fearless. And I take Rachel's point of shooting shotgun first before you shoot cannonballs. I think every company that goes into business these days is going into categories where there's a Goliath. Every company goes in to take on a much bigger, much stronger opponent. Everybody goes in to change behavior, right? And you need to be fearless if you want to do that. Fearlessness, to me, is 2 parts. One is never giving up believing, right? The Airbnb founders, for example, they were turned down by so many investors because they thought it's the dumbest idea ever. They were running deep on credit card after credit card after credit card. They tried to pivot for a while. They had different ideas, but they actually stuck with it. They bumped heads with district attorneys. They had a lot of issues with the hotel lobbies who were really running campaigns against them as well, right? But they were fearless and they kept on running, and they were not scared of the companies that were bigger. I'll give you 2 examples of other companies. Luxottica, anybody heard of that company? Only a few, right? So they are the biggest maker of glasses, sunglasses, and correction glasses. They own a $9 billion business. And they have carved out a huge part of the market, and they have massive profit margins because they were just able to jack up the prices. So here comes Warby Parker. Warby Parker started their business by saying, wait, something's wrong with this. Why are my Ray-Bans so expensive? It's just plastic. And then they did an analysis and they saw that the manufacturer of all the brand sunglasses, the Gucci's and the Chanel's and the Ray-Bans, it's all the same company, right? They're just checking up the prices. So they said, okay, we can do this better. We can cut out a middleman. We're also going direct to consumer, so people can buy the sunglasses online. And they took a quite significant amount of share from that market. The other example is Gillette. They owned about 70% of the shavers market. Also, like somebody has a $7 billion head start. What are you going to do? You come in hot, like Dollar Shave Club or Harry's today, right? They also said this is a high margin game. There's one incumbent who's big and strong. We can find that niche and we can challenge them with smart use of media, with good products, with a subscription model, with home delivery, all the things that were interesting and important to people, but these guys could not deliver. I guess the second part of being fearless is about taking a stand for something, but also against something. I think in times of polarization that we see more and more happening today, it is so important to take a stand. And brands that are really standing out are the ones who take a punt, not just going with the easy positions that are easy to follow, but also the ones that are a little bit more provocative in a way. I think Nike took quite a punt when they supported the stance that Colin Kaepernick took. Colin Kaepernick, NFL player, who was the first guy to take a knee during a national anthem because he was protesting or he wanted to make more people aware of police brutality against African Americans. He got sacked from his job. Nobody else wanted to hire him anymore. And a year and a half later, Nike put out an ad, a pretty big campaign where they supported that, where they supported him. And there was a big backlash that Nike got. But there was also a lot of support, right? In a divided society and a divided economy as well, you will have to be able to face both sides, right? I think they took a really, really strong position here. During the time when the US government was getting a lot stricter at the borders, and sending people away and taking people up, taking families apart, Airbnb actually took a stand. I think this was a film that was, not too provocative, but there were a lot of people who are supporting the policies that the government in the US put into place. And for a brand to take a stand like this was quite strong. Now, the question is, what can you do? What can you guys do? If you are an entrepreneur, if you're working with clients in an agency, or if you're just employed in a company, what is it that you can do? And I think there are 3 bits that I would love for you to take away. Making your mission, your story, and your customer the hero. That's the first bit. I think being very clear about what is your truth, and does that truth actually apply to my audience as well? Can they buy into it? Can they relate to it? And can I tell a story that is authentic and relevant? How can I tell that story not just from my point of view, but actually make my customer the center of attention? The problem that I'm solving, how does it affect somebody's life? The second one is defining meaningful core values and fostering company culture. I think Rachel showed some core values which were really cool and was really impressive to see. One core value at Airbnb out of 5 is to be a host. And being a host means opening doors, being welcoming to people, being considerate, anticipating others people's needs, stepping up when somebody needs help, right? When you are in a company and you see especially leadership living the core values every day, all the time, a company culture will emerge by itself. Right? And company culture is not just about having ping pong tables. Company culture is about how do we behave towards each other, how do we make decisions, how do we behave towards the outside world. The last one is combining the power of science and the beauty of art. I'm a firm believer that using just the data side, just the technology side of things, is going to make things a lot more rational, is going to make things a lot more equal. I think the magic happens when you embrace creativity, when you embrace the art, and you combine the two of them. If you use data in a smart way to uncover insights, but then you apply your creative side, and you really tap into human emotions as well, and you combine these two, that's when magic happens. So I leave you with this, and I would love to answer any questions that you have.
Oftentimes, my clients will come to me and say, I need to make money now, I need my sales. It's a short-term vision, but it's very real. They would then put aside branding, they would then put aside things that typically cannot be accounted for. So how do you think we can change that?
I understand the needs of the business objectives, right? If you are just going in with brand objectives that are long-term, you're just doing probably dreamy things. Every problem that you're solving through brand needs to address a business problem. It needs to answer to a business objectives, I believe that. I know that brand activities, that's long-term activities. If you want short-term results, you need to run short-term activities. And there are things that are, I think, smart. Any kind of growth hacking tactics that you can apply in the short term, you can do that. But there are also things that can be harmful. If you just say, if I put out a discount, I can make sales like that. Good. If there's any kind of pressure to make sales, to offload stock that you have, for example, or to prohibit somebody else from entering the market, go run your discounts. But that's a short-term activity. I always tell my clients that it's always product and brand over price. I think having short-term goals is fine. Having short-term tactics is fine. But if you're, as an entrepreneur, you started something not for the next quarter. You didn't run your company based on what am I going to do in 6 months. You do it for 5, 10, 15, 25 years horizon. I think getting leaders buy in on that, helping them understand that yes, we can help you with short-term activities that are in line with the overall strategy, that are still on brand, that are not harmful for the brand, while doing long-term things. There's enough studies. My favorite one is always, my favorite one is a book, I think it's called, it's Power Brands or Super Brands, I forget. But it's by McKinsey guys in Germany who wrote it, who basically saying, at the end of the day, it's the creative side that wins versus the rational communication, right? Rational communication is, this is the product, what it does, this is the price it costs, buy it now. That's short-term activity. But if you have long-term, creative, brand-driven activities, they will win in the long run. That's what the McKinsey guys say. So if anybody has a CFO who says we need to make money now, show them the McKinsey book that should help.
My name is Andrew. Thank you for your presentation. My question is, let's take Airbnb as an example. It's a hugely successful global brand. But in the course of your work with them, there must have been some examples of localization, the need for localization. How do global brands approach this? And how important is it to maintain the uniformity of the global brand versus the local branding? And it's not just, content, language, but rather different brands strategy, different messaging.
Thanks, Andrew. So every brand has that challenge, and some brands are more rigorous about their execution, and other brands realize that they need to be more nuanced to reflect cultural differences, to reflect maturity of market, to reflect competitive environment, and so on. I think Apple is one of those brands that is very, very, very stringent and very centered around their core idea and their core identity. I think it took them years, I think it was maybe 5 years ago for the first time that they had an ad created in China for the Chinese market. It was an adaptation to a narrative or a story that they had created in the US, and then they peppered it with not only talent that was local, but also a bit of more cultural relevant things. So it's a lot of companies that have that issue and that they see that issue. How do they handle it? I always talk to my teams about as local as possible, as global as possible and as local as necessary. Finding that balance. I think if you see the upside of using synergies and having a consistent, clear brand all over the world is, it's a good thing. You can save a lot of money, just in production, for example. There should be no need to position your brand differently if you are starting with a universal human insight, that human truth. That should not be different. Doesn't matter if you're from Myanmar or if you're from the UK. Right? It's about the human motivations. That's not very different. Finding that, I would always give it kind of a 80-20 balance depending on what category you're in. If you're in a foods company, it's probably a bit of a different story. If you're in tech, you can obviously be a lot more global. You don't need to be that local.